As Russian President Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine approaches its third deadly week, a financial counteroffensive unleashed by Western governments across multiple fronts has already sunk his country's economy into a crisis that it may not recover from for years, if ever. Evidence of Russia's economic implosion mounts by the day. On Tuesday, Fitch Ratings downgraded Russia's credit rating to junk status and said a default on Russia's foreign debt obligations is imminent. The rating change came after U.S. President Joe Biden imposed a ban on imports of Russian oil and gas, a move he said targeted the main artery of Russia's economy, which relies heavily on energy exports to fill its coffers. The sanctions imposed on the Russian government, officials, individuals, companies, and the country's central bank have been swift and unprecedented. While there's a robust debate about whether these sanctions will achieve their political goals and convince Mr. Putin to change his behavior, their economic impact is far more clear-cut, Neil Shearing, chief economist at Capital Economics, wrote in a note this week. In short order, Russia has become the world's most sanctioned country, leapfrogging past Iran for the top spot, with more than 5,500 outstanding sanction actions against it. Last week, French Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire said the goal of the sanctions was to cause the collapse of the Russian economy. While Mr. Le Maire later backtracked his comments as inappropriate, that stated goal has only moved closer to reality since then. Mr. Putin calls the sanctions an act of war. In response to them, Russia compiled and released a running tally this week of what it deems unfriendly countries, including Ukraine, the United States, Britain, all EU countries, Canada, Norway, South Korea, Taiwan, and Micronesia, to name a few. The problem for Mr. Putin is those unfriendly countries and regions make up the largest share of Russia's exports and its imports. An analysis of International Monetary Fund trade flow data by the Globe and Mail shows. The onslaught of actions taken against Moscow has left forecasters scrambling to revise their growth forecasts for the Russian economy, an almost impossible task when most of the country's financial and trade links to the rest of the world have been temporary, and in some cases permanently severed. In a new analysis to be released Thursday, the Institute of International Finance, the trade association for the global financial services industry, predicts the sanctions have triggered a severe recession in Russia that will see its economy shrink by 15% in 2022. If that forecast comes to pass, it would be a collapse worse than the 2008 to 2009 Great Recession and Russia's 1998 debt default crisis combined. Russia's currency has been caught in the downdraft. The ruble CAD RUB -11.68% decrease has lost more than half its value since the invasion began, as Western investors have dumped Russian assets and several Russian banks have been banned from using the SWIFT international payments system. At the same time, Western governments have targeted Russia's central bank with sanctions that have cut it off from accessing half the country's US $643 billion in foreign exchange reserves, which are held in Europe and North America. The ruble's collapse is worsening the cost of living crisis ordinary Russians were already facing, by making everyday imported goods more expensive, assuming those goods can even be found amid empty store shelves. Even before the invasion, the annual inflation rate in Russia was running at around 8.5%. If it were sustained in the coming weeks and months, could see the Russian annual inflation rate almost double in the coming months, Michael Metcalf, global head of macro strategy at State Street Global Markets, wrote in a research note. The official gauge of Russia's inflation rate is already showing immediate evidence of the impact of the sanctions and currency rout. In the span of just 1 week between February 26 and March 4, consumer prices climbed 2.2%, according to figures released Wednesday by Russia's statistics service Rosstat. Bloomberg said prices for imported cars and TVs alone climbed 15% during that period. However, some analysts argue the inflation rate in Russia is already far higher than what official numbers show. Steve Hanke, a professor at Johns Hopkins University, calculates theoretical inflation rates for troubled currencies using a formula that relies on the purchasing power of local currencies. His implied annual inflation rate for Russia stands at 135%. With no access to half of Russia's foreign exchange reserves, and faced with surging inflation, the central bank signaled its desperation to save the ruble by doubling Russia's policy interest rate to 20% last week. It also shut down the country's stock market to ease turmoil, though Russian companies that continued trading for several days on US and British exchanges went into freefall, wiping out most of their value.